Charlene here, wondering what this peace and prosperity plan is. So was I. So I sat down with our Kadi to learn more.
I wanted to talk about politics of all things.
There's just a lot of questions, so I love this opportunity to sit and chat with you.
I know. And what a perfect place to ask an Israeli about politics. I mean, Israelis were coffee-going people, coffee shops. So we're in a coffee
Yes.
shop. I wish it was something like Aroma or Cafe Cafe.
Me
or London.
too. So the official title is Peace to Prosperity Plan. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about this peace vision framework?
Sure. So yeah, it's actually a good word, framework, because that's what it is. It's just changing of the entire paradigm of treating the Middle East. So obviously, as you know, there were many other attempts to solve the Middle Eastern problem and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But I think what is different here is basically two things, and it's really a change of paradigm. So in the past, we were treating Palestinians as of victims that needs to be compensated. And I think when you read carefully that long, 180 pages long document, you actually discover that this is completely off the table. Palestinians are not victims. And I actually think that this is a very empowering message to the Palestinians themselves, because it gives them the agency that they can actually fulfill their national dreams. I know that I actually have an Instagram page that is dedicated. What I've done here is I summed up, I put on the map, I put on all the little details. So let's talk about the framework, two-state solution, which was off the table for a few years, but actually it is coming back. These are the actual words that the President Trump used. We have a detailed map, which we didn't have in previous agreements. And we have status quo for Temple Mount. The Temple Mount, the holiest places for three religions, where it remains the same. We have 4 years to work out the details of the agreement. The deal assumes the end of conflict and the end of claims on both sides.
One of the biggest things that we're asking is more of what this 4-year vision means.
So the actual number of 4 years, it's not so much about the 4 years to implement it, but it gives that period of time to the Palestinians to accept the very notion of that deal and to negotiate with Israelis. Now, we already know that the Palestinians said no to the plan, so they rejected it. But I think what is beautiful about the plan is that it lays out 4 additional years in which, should the Palestinians decide to change their mind, maybe the leadership changes, maybe the circumstances change, it is still on the table.
So you shared a little bit about conditions and terms.
So there are a few conditions and terms, both the Palestinian side and the Israelis. And it's important to stress out that we use these words, conditions and terms. It's not imposing anything on anyone. This is actually this plan is an outcome of 3 years of research and negotiations made by the current U.S. administration with the Israelis and with the Palestinian side. So some Israelis and some Palestinians might reject it, but it does reflect to a certain extent certainly the consensus on the Israeli street, but also takes into consideration the claims and the concerns and the challenges voiced by the Palestinian leadership and just regular people. So first of all, the Palestinians get a state. Okay, that's a very important piece of it. They get a sovereign state. It is going to be a disarmed state. It means that they are not going to have a full-scale military to counter the Israeli concerns about the security. So the Palestinians, yes, they're going to get their own state, and 97% of the Palestinians will live in contiguous areas. Now, that's a very important piece of the agreement, because right now, many people don't know that, but right now, Judea and Samaria, West Bank, it's actually an archipelago of 160 islands. Islands meaning communities towns, villages.
Not surrounded by water.
Right, they're not surrounded by water, but they're not connected one to another. And I'm talking about both Israeli settlements, Israeli communities, and Palestinian villages and towns. There right now, many of them are not connected with it, which poses a great challenge and hardship on the residents, both Palestinians and Israelis, because they have to have all this trouble to go through checkpoints, moving from one island to another. But this plan actually suggests that no, we have to create a situation where people can travel freely between corresponding places.
So does that actually adhere to the frame and the meme I think I've been seeing a lot of is this Swiss cheese idea on the map. So is what you're sharing with us, it's actually going to be a little bit less and a little bit better?
Yes, that's exactly the point. It used to be a Swiss cheese. It is a Swiss cheese now, but it should be solved, and the plan definitely addresses that. So 97% of the future Palestinian areas will be connected one to another. The plan also suggests the land swaps to achieve the pre-1967 Six-Day War territory size. If you look closely at the map, you will see there are some new areas being attached to Gaza. Also, a great incentive is $15 billion in the form of investments. And these are actually the 100 pages that I mentioned with Excel tables, where you see it all planned out. Another thing that the Palestinians get is the capital in East Jerusalem. The question of refugees is off the table, meaning Palestinian refugees living either in Palestinian Authority or outside of Palestine, in Jordan, Syria, and other countries. It's always a very challenging issue, the Palestinian refugees. So the agreement doesn't deal with that in terms of them getting back to Israel. They will remain in their host countries. And it's interesting that that this agreement or this plan talks about the Jewish refugees. There is such a thing, Jewish refugees who were forced to flee Arab countries and Muslim countries with the establishment of the State of Israel. We're talking about similar numbers to Palestinian refugees. The plan doesn't require any compensation per se, but it does mention that it has to be dealt within that context as well.
Obviously, there's what we call sort of conditions and terms. What are some of the conditions for Palestinians?
All these bullet points that I've just provided you, they assume that the Palestinians will commit to a peace process, which means that it is required before we go into negotiations, it is required that we have a firm rejection of terrorism by the Palestinian state. So another thing is to promote culture of peace in education. We also expect the Palestinians to terminate compensations to terrorists and their families. Terrorists and their families are being compensated by the Palestine right now. And the most basic thing, to recognize the State of Israel as a Jewish state. So the idea is that all these terms or conditions that we've provided, step number one, we see that the Palestinians are not committed to that at the initial stages, so there's really no point in going further. But then again, as we said, the Palestinians already said no, but we are hopeful that this can change, and this is why this offer is still available for 4 years.
So let's break it down a little bit further, because I definitely think we've been asked that on social media. The Palestinians already have rejected the plan. So really dive into what does that mean and what happens next?
It means is that they still have 4 years to change their minds. And these conditions will stay. But in order to answer to that question, we actually have to go on terms and conditions for Israelis, because it's not only for the Palestinians, but the Israelis too. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, the undivided capital. It was already announced by this administration a couple of years ago, but now it becomes part of the agreement. The U.S. administration does not expect the Israelis to compromise on security. And just as for the Palestinians, 97% of the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria and West Bank they will continue living on contiguous areas. Remember, we talked about this archipelago, about that Swiss cheese. So this is going to change for Israelis as well. Obviously, there are some conditions for Israelis too. Israelis are obliged not to build and not to change the status quo on the Palestinian territories within 4 years. And when we say Palestinian territories, it is where the majority of the Palestinians are living currently. The idea here is for Israel not to apply Israeli sovereignty in the entire Judea and Samaria, but only in the places where the majority of Jews are living currently. All Israelis are required for gradual release of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons, excluding obviously murderers and attempts of murder, but younger people and women who are currently in prison will be gradually released over a period of few years. And Israel is also required to recognize Palestine as the nation state of the Palestinian people.
As the plan was rejected, and you said there's 4 years to fulfill it, is Israel going to do these three things that you said over the course of the 4 years, or is it on a holding pattern?
So it's important to stress out, this is not a deal yet. This is just an offer. Okay. This is just an offer, and the details of that offer will need to be discussed between the Palestinians and Israelis. So right now, that offer wasn't accepted by the Palestinians. By that effect, Israelis are not required to fulfill either. But I think that's at least what the Prime Minister Netanyahu announced, that the first next major step would be applying Israeli sovereignty on the Jordan Valley and the Jewish settlements of Judea and Samaria.
So break that down in case we have viewers who are totally new to this whole subject. What does that mean?
You will see here that this is Jordan Valley, and this is Judea and Samaria, and these are the enclaves with Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. Applying Israeli sovereignty, some people call it annexing. The proper term to use is applying sovereignty, not annexation. And what it means right now, the Jewish communities in the Jordan Valley and in Judea Samaria, they under military law. They're still considered Israeli citizens, but this is a different set of rules. But symbolically and also legally, what it means is that Judea and Samaria, at least these parts of Judea and Samaria and Jordan Valley, they become a legitimate part of the state of Israel. It's no more territories in disputed territories. It's not longer West Bank. This is just as Israeli as Tel Aviv, Haifa, or Eilat.
This was 3 years in the making, and there were multiple parties involved in this process. I think it would clarify a little bit for people who was involved in this 3-year process.
According to the current U.S. administration, negotiations and talks and research was being made with the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, both with political leadership and social leadership and just with regular people. I'm quoting. I cannot say if it was the equal amount of energy and time was spent on both sides, but I see that this agreement definitely takes into consideration. I'm not saying that it supplies the complete solution, but it does address the concerns and the challenges voiced by both sides. No, it's not perfect for none of the sides, but at least it does address all these issues. For instance, the refugees question, it is being addressed. It's not being solved according to what the Palestinian wants, but they do not ignore it.
This is really a paradigm shift, and that's sort of how we topped off our conversation. A little bit of history for everyone. What is the Oslo Agreement, just as a refresher, and then how does it play into this?
Yes, it is an important question because in '94 we did have an Oslo Agreement that attempted to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is the agreement for which both Palestinian leader and Israeli leaders got the Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, it did not provide the security for Israelis, and Some Israelis even call the terrorist years of terrorist attacks following the Oslo Agreement. Some of the Israelis even go as far as to call it Oslo War. This particular peace plan, I would say, disregard the Oslo Agreement. It's a completely new approach. It promises a Palestinian state within a certain territory.
So on your Insta post, you mentioned a few interesting tidbits, and one was about a Dead Sea resort. I happen to love the desert in general, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the items on that plan was I found it interesting. So it's actually promised to build a resort on the northern shore. Say we're in New Jersey, so I call it the shore. On the northern shore of the Dead Sea. It is an Israeli territory, but it will be designated for developing tourism by the Palestinian authorities.
I think that for a lot of years we've talked about economic partnerships, and I think that's sort of a hint to peace through economy.
Exactly that. Another interesting tidbit that at the press conference unveiling the plan, there were three investors from Arab countries: Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and also Oman. And this is a completely new page in Israel-Arab world relationship. I mean, I'm not saying that they were cheering the president and the prime minister to the same extent as the rest of the crowd, but at least they were there, and it is a statement of a new era.
As the Israel Shaliach in our South Jersey Jewish community, what feedback are you getting from our residents here locally?
So it's interesting. I get feedback from both very flattering and euphoric. It's a historical day, and I also get a lot of critical questions, which I'm trying to address on my Facebook page and on my Instagram page. So please feel free. I love political questions. Feel free to be as spicy as you can. You can ask questions here on YouTube, on Facebook, or on Instagram.
Yes, and I think that's really a true offer where you take the time to answer everyone's questions, and especially with nuance and detail, kind of breaking it down and sharing with us. Really, what it says is what we really talked about today. Is what the agreement does and how that relates.
And it was fun. We should do it again.
Yes.
Great.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Arkady.
Thank you, Charlene.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.